Yes, hello everyone, and welcome to this first HCI virtual meetup. There's been a lot of excitement on HCI on Microsoft Inspire. And it was a cool session, but a lot of questions were raised, and Cosmos is doing a recap this day, evening or morning, or where you are. So he's doing a recap of his session, like 30 minutes. And after that session, he's going to do 30 minutes of Q&A. And I will help him with that. So you guys sent in a lot of questions. I picked the frequently asked questions. So we're going to handle that. And if you have questions that are unanswered, then you can just fire them off in the Q&A on Teams. I will moderate it, and we'll make sure that your question gets answered in the session. So now I'm going to hand it off to Cosmos, who's coming live from Los Angeles, to first do the recap, and after that we're going to do the Q&A.
Cool. Thank you so much, Daryl, and thank you everybody for taking the time to join this community meetup. This is the first time for me doing this. I think it's the first one that's been done, so I'm pretty excited about that. And Daryl mentioned beforehand that we had a pretty healthy set of folks who had registered and who were tuning in, so that's really awesome. Thank you so much for your passion and your excitement around Azure Stack HCI. So as Daryl mentioned, we shared some pretty big news for Azure Stack HCI at Microsoft Inspire last month. I'll be honest, it's the most excited that I have felt about HCI in a long time. It's the most excited that the team has felt in a long time. So we're really eager to make sure that everyone here is aware of that news, and I'll recap a little bit of what we shared. But we really are going to try to get through that content as quickly as possible. So I'll try to spend at most half an hour. I think it'll be a lot less than that. Hopefully it'll be more like 15 minutes. Just getting through sort of what we covered at Microsoft Inspire, and then we will do our absolute best to get through the questions that you submitted and that you submit through the Q&A. There's probably going to be some questions that I don't have the answer to, or that I don't know, or we don't have a good answer for you. So my apologies in advance for that, but we'll try to address all the questions we possibly can, because that's the whole goal of getting the community engaged. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and give you sort of a recap of what we talked about at Microsoft Inspire. So Daryl, if you can let me know once you're able to see my screen here. Is that coming through for you?
Yep, it is right now.
Terrific. Cool. Thank you. All right. So let's dive into it. As Daryl said, my name is Cosmos. I'm a senior PM on the Azure team at Microsoft. Specifically, I work on the Azure Edge Platform organization. And this is a brief look at what is new for Azure Stack HCI. So the first thing I want to acknowledge, even before we really get into the substance of that too much, is just the fact that our marketing organization has wisely decided to name this thing the exact same name as something that already exists. So the product that we announced at Microsoft Inspire last month is named Azure Stack HCI, and it takes that name from, of course, its popular predecessor and namesake, which was the program that Microsoft has run for many years using recent versions of Windows Server. So up until this point, Azure Stack HCI meant that you took a couple of Windows servers and you sort of configured them and set them up just right so that they were a hyper-converged infrastructure. That's what that term has meant up until this point. Going forward, it actually refers to a very specific product from Microsoft, which is what we'll talk about. Now, that's going to be a source of some confusion for some time. I realize that. So just wanted to acknowledge up front. Sorry for the confusion. We're going to do our best to come up with ways for keeping these straight, either referring to Windows Server-based HCI versus Azure Stack HCI or something like that. But yeah, sorry for the confusion. Just let me say that up front. Okay, so in terms of unpacking the latest Azure Stack HCI, which we announced at Inspire last month, I think it's easiest to think about this in terms of kind of three things. If we ask what is Azure Stack HCI, well, first of all, it's a hyper-converged infrastructure software stack, right? Meaning it's software that you as a customer install on your servers that you control on your premises. It contains Azure's latest hypervisor, which most of you know, under the beloved name Hyper-V. And it includes, of course, built-in software-defined storage and software-defined networking to go with that. But it's also delivered as an Azure hybrid service, meaning it natively shows up in the Azure portal. It's supported and billed and monitored through Microsoft Azure. And it's very specifically tailored to be familiar for an IT team that has experience and expertise they've developed in virtualization and in servers. So if you have a set of tools or a set of investments that you've made in skills and processes, especially around Hyper-V, those carry forward and are still applicable to Azure Stack HCI. So for me, that's kind of the three essential pillars of unpacking really what this product is. It's an HCI stack delivered as a cloud service for IT, but we can unpack a little bit more what each of these things mean. Now, if we start by just talking about the fact that Azure Stack HCI, of course, is a hyper-converged infrastructure stack. Well, everyone I imagine in the Slack community is very well aware of what that means, broad strokes, right? It means consolidation. It means taking a traditional 3-tier architecture and really modernizing it towards something where you have industry standard servers with a bunch of additional high-speed drives and high-speed networking, which you can use to then synthesize what you would have gotten from traditional storage and traditional network appliances. So, SDN provides you with virtual networks, virtual switches, virtual load balancers, and gateways. Software-defined storage, SDS, provides you with virtual data volumes, which are actually behind the scenes backed by just industry standard drives, SATA, SAS, NVMe, persistent memory, with shared nothing storage, right? So there's no fancy cables, there's no black box SAN or NAS, it's just local drives in your virtualization hosts. So this is HCI. I imagine everyone on this call is pretty familiar with HCI. So what's changing? The first thing is that whereas previously, in order to do Azure Stack HCI, you needed to go and license a copy of Windows Server, just the off-the-shelf standard, like the data center edition of Server 2016 or Server 2019, which you could use for many other purposes too. That used to be the software that you needed. There is now a purpose-built specialized host operating system from Microsoft specifically for Azure Stack HCI. This is to send a very clear signal that this is a very important scenario for Microsoft. We have a set of technologies that we want to bring to bear here that we want to get into your hands as customers. And so we've made a special product, a special operating system SKU just for this purpose. This Azure Stack HCI operating system, as I said, includes the absolute latest hypervisor tech that we have, as well as our built-in software-defined storage and networking capabilities. And we're able to take some additional steps with this operating system that we could not have easily done with Windows. So for example, we can reduce its composition to focus it, very specifically on a virtualization host. We can change the out-of-box experience because there's a much reduced set of things that you actually would need to do. So you'll see when you log in for the first time, it simply says, welcome to Azure Stack HCI, and gives you a menu that we're rapidly iterating on of just the things you really need to do before you can log out and manage it remotely, things like that. So this is the first thing that's changing, is the existence of this new HCI-specific operating system from Microsoft Azure. In addition to, removing a few things like stripping down the composition in order to focus it more on HCI, there are also a number of things that are new that have been added into this operating system. The first one is an extremely popular feature that's been requested, for a long time now, which is a native disaster recovery solution using stretched clustering. So using this new operating system, using the Azure Stack HCI OS from this year, it is possible to span an Azure Stack HCI across multiple locations. That can be 2 rooms or 2 buildings or 2 cities. They can be close together or far apart. And then to use Storage Replica to provide synchronous or asynchronous replication with optional encryption between the 2 sites, which are each running a separate storage spaces direct storage pool. Now, to emphasize, each side of this cluster behaves just like a cluster of size n/2. So in this case, in this illustration, you're seeing a 4-node cluster with 2 nodes in London and 2 nodes in Paris. Each of these sites behaves just like a 2-node cluster would, meaning you have site local resiliency, you can do 2-way mirroring, you can even do nested resiliency on each side of this cluster, and then storage replication over the top using Storage Replica. And because of how that works, you get the guarantee that virtual machines can automatically fail over from one site to the other, which is what we mean, of course, when we say disaster recovery, business continuity, BCDR. All of that is possible without any active admin involvement because the replication is happening and because it's all managed as part of one failover cluster. So this was an often requested scenario that we're super excited to deliver sooner than people expected in this new version of Azure Stack HCI. I can actually give you a quick demo if you don't mind, and sort of give you a sense for how that looks and how that works from the user experience. Starting in Windows Admin Center, which is the face of Azure Stack HCI, remains the primary user interface for most things. When I choose to deploy a cluster, I can indicate that I'm deploying using the new Azure Stack HCI OS. I can show whether all the servers are in one site or in two sites. In this case, I'll choose that they're spread between two sites. And then you'll see that later on in this workflow, I'll be given special options to configure what the two sites are and which of the servers are in which of the sites. Often we're able to detect that based on their network configuration, but even if we aren't, you can let us know as part of that workflow to deploy. Then, whenever I'm creating storage later on, like if I'm provisioning a storage spaces direct volume, you'll see that the workflow to do that has been augmented a little so that I can choose whether the volume is on a single site or whether it should be replicated between two sites. And if it's replicated, I can choose the direction. I can choose whether replication should be synchronous or asynchronous. And actually, there are a number of other additional options which I could choose from if I wanted, such as seeding the replication or encrypting the traffic and so on. So that's just one example of something that's new in that new Azure Stack HCI operating system, but there's a lot more. Another top request has been to actually reimagine how Storage Spaces Direct does resynchronization and repair in order to make it faster. And we've done that. So there is a resynchronization and repair engine in Windows Server 2019, which is a core component of Storage Spaces. That engine has been completely re-engineered in this new Azure Stack HCI operating system. And you can see the results on the screen here are very, very dramatic. On the sort of 50th percentile case, the average case, with this new version of Azure Stack HCI, resync and repair takes about a quarter as long as it used to on Windows Server 2019. This is the results from some internal testing using some moderate but representative IOs across different workload patterns. In the worst case, it actually gets even more extreme. So in the worst case, it could take about 45 minutes in our testing to resync a Windows Server 2019 from applying a monthly patch. That is reduced by a factor of almost 5 with the new Azure Stack HCI. It's much, much quicker. This is a real game changer for scenarios where you have to go reboot your nodes, typically for things like updating. So this was another top requested feature that we're super thrilled to be able to ship in this new OS. And the third thing that I want to make sure I cover in terms of host OS capabilities is actually something that it's subtle, and we weren't hearing a huge amount of feedback for this, but as soon as we did announce this last month, we got overwhelmed with the positive response. And that is integrated full stack updates with a single click. What do I mean when I say full stack? I mean, you're not just updating the host operating system, you're also getting all the right drivers and firmware as you do that in one integrated experience to roll out those updates. So we've significantly increased the extensibility of cluster-aware updating and of Windows Admin Center in order to enable this capability. And we're working very closely with our OEM partners to deliver a full stack updating experience as part of their solutions for the new Azure Stack HCI. You can see on the screen here a screenshot of an early working version of this from our friends at Dell EMC. They're very often the quickest to pick up on new opportunities from us. And they've done an amazing job partnering with us to build this up until this point. You can see, just to be clear, this is a completely real screenshot of a Windows Admin Center workflow for cluster-aware updating, but where in addition to the OS updates, I'm seeing updates from Dell for the RAID controller for the boot drive, the video driver, the system firmware, and many, many other things that make up a full Azure Stack HCI solution. This is not something that's available right now. It will ship on the timelines dictated by the OEMs. So Dell will determine when this particular one is available and the other partners likewise. But this is something that will be coming soon with this new version of Azure Stack HCI, and we're super excited about it. I can't wait to hear what you guys think about this. So that's a quick tour of some of the things that are new in the hyperconverged infrastructure stack itself. I want to talk now about the thing that's really different, which is Microsoft delivering this as an Azure hybrid service. Like, what does that mean, right? Is this hosted, or how do we understand what it means to have something that is an HCI stack like this, but delivered as an Azure service? So let's talk about that. We hear feedback all the time from customers that hybrid is, first of all, it's very clearly the future for them, right? They anticipate, this year, next year, 5 years from now, having more and more of their infrastructure spread between some things on premises and other things operating in a hyperscale public cloud. But even though they know that that's where they want to get to, it's very hard. And we hear that feedback loud and clear, whether it's networking or identity or something else. It's just not as easy as it should be to operate a hybrid infrastructure. So Azure Stack HCI is specifically designed to make that easier. We're trying to deliver on what we believe is that next set of scenarios that customers tell us they're really looking for. When you finish setting up an Azure Stack HCI, it natively registers with your Azure subscription so that it shows up as a resource in a resource group in the Azure portal that you can manage through the Azure Resource Manager. This is completely different from how Windows Server worked, right? Windows Server, you would transact it as an on-premises license. You'd pay for it up front, you'd take it home, and that was it, right? We didn't necessarily know who you were. You didn't necessarily have any ability to sort of identify automatically to us. There were a lot of limitations with that kind of transactional model. With Azure Stack HCI, you no longer have to fuss with connecting the dots. How do I hook this up into my estate in Azure? I have some VMs or I have some virtual networks in Azure. I want to connect to them. How do I do that? You no longer have to stress about it's not hard. So there's no agent. There's no complicated script. This is just a native capability of the Azure Stack HCI operating system. It exists in the context of you as an Azure customer and of your subscription with Azure. Now, to make this possible, if you know a lot about Azure, you probably realize that means behind the scenes there is a new resource provider from Microsoft, which is the Azure Stack HCI resource provider. There is a new resource type for Azure Stack HCI, and there's a significant amount of development going on that will build out the capabilities of this resource in Azure. But I can show you even just right now a quick demo of sort of what this means and what this looks like. So here's Azure Stack HCI in the Azure portal. Probably everyone on this call has used Azure before. At this point, it's over 95% of the Fortune 500 that use Azure, and I imagine everyone's seen this before. This is just the Azure portal at portal.azure.com. What you haven't seen before is this new Azure Stack HCI cloud service that shows up right here on the dashboard if you have some clusters. And you can clearly see here that on this subscription, I've actually set up 2 different clusters, and I can click on one of them, like the Contoso HCI cluster, and see it right here in the Azure portal as a first-class resource in the Azure Resource Manager in ARM. So this is my Azure Stack HCI. I can see some basic information like the hardware make and model. I can see that there's 2 server nodes. I can see the operating system version, how much CPU, how much memory. And you can see even where we're going here with things like, is this cluster up to date is one of the things we're working on. Is this cluster healthy? How can I monitor this cluster directly here from the Azure portal? And so our vision with this presence of Azure Stack HCI directly in the Azure portal is that for customers who deploy many clusters, who deploy tens or hundreds or even thousands of different locations, think of retailers or manufacturing companies or other businesses like that, you now have a single pane of glass in the Azure portal where you can get a clear view across your entire fleet, across your entire estate of Azure Stack HCI, without setting up any kind of cumbersome on-premises monitoring infrastructure for it. You can just hook it up directly to Azure. In fact, it's essentially the out-of-the-box behavior, right? It's how this product works. So in addition to what you see on the screen, which is sort of the customer visible user interface in the Azure portal, there's a lot of advantages here, right? As an Azure resource, this means Azure Stack HCI can be tagged, just like you would tag anything else. You can organize your clusters into resource groups. You can leverage Azure Identity Access Management to determine which other people in your business have the ability to come in and modify things related to this resource. These are all essentially ways in which the Azure Resource Manager is being extended to also encompass Azure Stack HCI, in addition to the things that you're already running in the public cloud. Now, we know that Azure customers love Azure support. And so this new Azure Stack HCI operating system and cloud service will be holistically covered under an Azure support contract. For most existing customers of Azure, this means it's already covered under a contract they already have. This means you can access Azure Stack HCI self-help resources in the Azure portal. And you can use the Azure portal to submit a support request and to track your case with Microsoft Azure. And the plans are very, very affordable and cover all different types of customer scenarios. So you can choose a plan starting at as low as $29 a month for a developer or $100 a month for standard support. And by the way, that's for your entire billing account. That's not per node or per cluster. And so you could have, for example, standard support for $100 a month or Pro Direct support for $1,000 a month, covering hundreds or thousands of Azure Stack HCI clusters in the same billing account. So it's a very different approach to support than what you might be used to if you are primarily a customer who uses Microsoft's on-premises products. Just to be clear, if you have an existing Premier Support contract, that of course covers Azure Stack HCI as well. So you're good there. In addition to being visible and being supported through Microsoft Azure, this new Azure Stack HCI is also billed through Microsoft Azure as a monthly subscription for the service, just like you would pay a subscription for any other service in Azure. Now, the fee structure is very specifically designed to be extremely simple. So it's predictable cost that does not vary based on how many VMs you have. It does not vary based on how much memory or network ingress, egress, or storage you have. It is a flat fee that depends only on how many physical processor cores are in your infrastructure. So what's nice is that means you can take a look at a particular server that you're planning to deploy and quickly do the math and figure out how much that will cost for a month or for a year or for whatever horizon it is that you're planning around based on sort of the accounting practices of your business. And there's not any uncertainty in terms of like, oh, well, what if someone turns on another VM and then suddenly it costs more? So hopefully this predictability is really pleasing to you as a customer. You can learn more about this at azure.com/pricing, and that page will get updated with a pricing fact and data sheet that the team is working on. We're hoping to get that out sometime this month, maybe next month at the latest, but that will include a frequently asked questions as well. One thing to note is that just like other HCI products on the market today, this Azure Stack HCI does not include any particular guest operating systems or guest applications bundled in. So if you want to run a MongoDB on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, that's sold separately. And if you want to run a SQL server on top of a Windows server, that's also sold separately, right? All of the guest apps and operating systems are separate from the core HCI infrastructure stack, just like they would be on, for example, VMware. Now, just to give you a sense for sort of what that cost is, this is the final GA price that we'll be going with later this year. And it's $10 US currency per physical processor node or per physical processor core per month. And by the way, something that I am personally super excited about is that there is no minimum or maximum. And so you can deploy an 8-core machine or a 4-core machine, or some of you may have seen me on Azure Friday with Scott Hanselman last week with a 2-core machine. And there is no minimum number of cores required here. So a 4-core machine, as you see on the screen, is $40 a month to license the HCI software. An 8-core machine is $80, and then it scales predictably from that point up with, again, no weird minimums or maximums. So it's an extremely simple cost structure that's very easy to work with. Now, these capabilities that we've talked about here for really transforming Azure Stack HCI into a hybrid cloud service, these complement the existing capabilities that we've already talked about in recent years, right? So whether that's securely connecting an on-premises network to an Azure virtual network, or protecting virtual machines by backing them up using site recovery, or using Azure Arc for servers to assign policies, and guest configuration into virtual machines. Those hybrid capabilities are now augmented by the fact that HCI itself is delivered as an Azure service. So it's visible in the Azure portal, it's supported and billed and monitored through Azure. And there's a lot more coming. We're really just scratching the surface here. Over the next couple of months, we'll be expanding the availability of the HCI service to more regions, including, as soon as we can, we're committed to getting into sovereign clouds as well, like Azure US Government and Azure China. And then there's some pretty exciting features that become possible with this new product. The future is like I said, I have never been as excited about this as I am right now. I can give you a sneak peek at what one of those features is, and that's VM self-service. Coming soon, this isn't available just yet in the preview, but coming soon, you'll be able to delegate access to your Azure Stack HCI cluster to other Azure users within your Azure Active Directory so that they can provision virtual machines and virtual networks. They can self-service those on top of your HCI cluster, but without being able to go in and muck up the infrastructure. So they won't be able to go in and shut down a host node or anything like that. But this means that within your organization, you kind of get this lightly isolated concept of tenancy, right? You can sort of allow other people to self-service things on top of your HCI, so long as you have a reasonable trust that they're not like malicious actors. This isn't really designed as a multi-tenanted hosting platform so much as it's for within an enterprise where you just want an easy way to let people create virtual machines without allowing them to harm the fabric. This has been a really top requested feature for a long time, so pretty excited to get this into your hands as soon as we can. The team is working on it right now. So that gives you a flavor for what we mean when we say delivered as an Azure hybrid service. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit what is and isn't intended there. Just to be very, very clear about that, this is not something that is hosted by Microsoft on our servers in our data centers. This is absolutely still a software stack that you in IT deploy on your hardware and that you control. You are a full administrator on the box. You decide how it works. You decide the tools you use. And that's actually a really good segue into this last section here, which is about making sure that Azure Stack HCI, in spite of all this exciting change, is still familiar and straightforward to manage and to operate. The first important piece of that is that, of course, you get to choose the hardware that makes sense for you. You can choose it from, over 200 solutions available from more than 20 partners around the world. This isn't even actually the updated list. I was made aware that there are additional partners I need to put on this slide. So you have a significant amount of choice as a customer in terms of what hardware actually suits your use case and suits your budget and is available and supported well in your region. You can choose the system that makes the most sense for you. And there's an immense amount of variety in the catalog. If you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to just go check out the sheer diversity from tower systems to 1U to 2U to 4U to systems with external JBODs. It's an immense amount of variety that's available for Azure Stack HCI. And more than just a variety of systems, you can actually customize most of these systems. So when we work with our hardware partners to ensure that their systems are pre-validated, they have to run a lengthy and extensive multi-node stress test that takes many, many days and that simulates all kinds of different failures. But the output from that is really a system with an HPA, if you need one for the storage, plus a network adapter family, things that use the same driver, that gets put into the catalog. There is usually a range of processors, a range of memory, a range of drives, and a range of networking speeds, which you, the customer, are then able to customize and choose between. So there's not really 200 different choices. There's actually a lot more than that. There's 200 base systems, which you can then configure in many, many ways. So an immense amount of hardware flexibility for you as the customer of Azure Stack HCI. But even more important than that, you can use consistent tools that you're already familiar with, that you've already invested in to manage it. So I showed some scenarios earlier where you could manage Azure Stack HCI a little bit through the Azure portal, but that is not the only way that you can reach this HCI cluster. I want to be very, very clear. Let me say that again. You absolutely still have local access to this thing. You can use edge local tools like Windows Admin Center, just as you might today for your Windows servers, to perform local management actions, even if your cloud connection is extremely limited in terms of bandwidth or is even temporarily down. That's fine. You can actually operate this thing disconnected for hours, days, up to several weeks with no interaction with the cloud at all, and that's completely okay. The only requirement is that once a month, Azure Stack HCI does need to successfully sync with the cloud. Otherwise, the data you see in the portal would be wildly out of date, and we would have no ability to support you or to bill you, right? So apart from that, though, if you need to be offline for a while or if you have a very limited connection, totally fine. And in fact, our teams are working really hard to make it as seamless as possible for you to switch between these sets of tools. So if there's a set of scenarios that you perform regularly using Admin Center, but from time to time, you go to the Azure portal for things like at-scale management if you have many, many clusters, our goal is to make that really seamless. And so you'll notice a set of design changes in Windows Admin Center, from the nav bar at the top to the iconography over on the left-hand side to the way that the controls are laid out on the main area of the screen. We're doing everything we can to change Windows Admin Center and change the Azure portal to make them look and feel as consistent as possible. So in this case, you'll see in this scenario, I've replicated a virtual machine up into Azure. I did that. I initiated that from within Admin Center. But now I'm going to switch over into the Azure portal. We change tabs here. It still looks and feels basically the same. And I'm, of course, still logged in, right? And so these kinds of scenarios where you really span the local tools that run at the edge with the cloud-based tools for at scale, our goal is to make those scenarios as seamless as possible, including not just switching in this direction, but we're also exploring ways to make it possible to switch in the other direction, to start from the portal and then just click one button and drill into Admin Center. We'll have more news to share on that pretty soon. It's not just about first-party tools. So I've talked about Admin Center, but there's actually a whole ecosystem of tools out there. You all, of course, know this very, very well. You know which tools it is that you and your teams prefer to use when managing HCI. And we're committed to making it so that you don't have to change the way your team operates. You don't need to reskill your entire organization just to adopt hyper-converged infrastructure. So this new Azure Stack HCI supports Windows PowerShell scripts in full. So there's a full .NET implementation of PowerShell in this operating system. So if you have an existing script that you use for Hyper-V or for Storage Spaces Direct, it is extremely likely to just work as is with this new operating system. We're also working to provide System Center support, specifically Operations Manager, SCOM, and System Center Virtual Machine Manager, SCVMM, for the new Azure Stack HCI. This is something that team has committed, and it is coming soon. We will have more exciting news to share on that front later this year. And finally, moving beyond first party, there's also a whole universe of third-party tools out there. Things like Altaro, right, which is an extremely popular and fast-growing backup solution. And in fact, if you go look at Altaro's blog, you'll see that they have already thrown their support behind this new Azure Stack HCI OS. So if you're an existing customer of Altaro, if you back up all of your IT estate using Altaro, you can absolutely take the same tools and bring them to Azure Stack HCI, and you don't have to relearn how you run your infrastructure. So that's sort of a quick recap. I think we're about halfway through the time here of what is new with this new Azure Stack HCI, right? It's a hyper-converged infrastructure stack with all the features that our team has been working on in recent months and years. It's delivered as an Azure hybrid service so that as an Azure customer, it effectively extends your management plane, extends your billing, extends your support that you already have for Azure to cover your hyper-converged infrastructure as well, even though it runs on premises. And we've done everything that we can to keep it as familiar as possible, from allowing you to choose and customize the hardware, to providing edge local tools, both first party and third party. And just to reiterate, with Azure Stack HCI, you are the admin, you are in control. You call the shots about how you run things and what tools you use to get that done. So if you're excited about this, if you're as excited as I am, the good news is this is available right now. You can try almost everything that I just talked about available in preview right now. So if you go to azure.com/HCI, you'll see that page now describes this new Azure Stack HCI product. The operating system part of that is being called Azure Stack HCI version 20H2, referring to the year 2020 and the second half of the calendar year. You can try the preview. It's for evaluation only right now, so there is no cost. The billing is $0. There's also no support right now. We're working quickly to hire that team and train everybody so that we can offer support for this. And you can use either your existing hardware or you can use virtual machines. We have an evaluation guide at aka.ms/evaluate HCI or HCI-eval guide. They both go to the same place. And that evaluation guide steps you through setting up the preview OS using either virtual machines or your own hardware. We would love to hear what you think. There's a number of places you can communicate with us about that. You can either report issues on the HCI Q&A page. You can use the user voice. We've created a new user voice for Azure Stack HCI. We will be blogging about many more details, especially technical details, using the Azure Stack blog, which has been expanded to cover the whole family. And of course, a number of members of our team, like Ellen, Kirby, and others, are active on the Slack channel. And so you can continue asking them your questions there as well. Okay, so with that, that's a look at what's new with Azure Stack HCI, and that concludes the presentation portion of this. And now I think, Daryl, if you want to come back off of mute, I would love to do my best to answer some of the questions that the community has.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm excited. I mean, I think it's really changing the way how we look at on-premise infrastructure. So from an architect point of view, like managing the clusters from Azure, provisioning services on your on-premise cluster from Azure, having ability to RBAC, tags, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's different from what we used to, like with a Hyper-V cluster, of course, an SCD cluster. But I think it's a big change, and it's not for everyone, but very welcome for some, I think.
Yeah, we've definitely gotten a lot of feedback for some of these very specific features. Customers who are betting on Azure, right? And that's increasingly true. Like I mentioned, 95% of the Fortune 500 are using Azure already. And there's, of course, thousands of customers who aren't in the Fortune 500. For those folks, extending what they already have to on-prem is a really big convenience.
Yeah, and it brings up interesting discussions, of course. I meet a lot of customers, IT directors, who get to, they must migrate to Azure just because their board says so. So, and then it's the discussion, we need to go to public cloud, but what does cloud mean, right? So if I'm having a cluster on premises which is managed by Azure, is that cloud or is that on-premise infrastructure? So
yeah,
it's
and in a number of ways now, it probably does meet what that company's board intended when they said cloud, right? So for example, if you have, as an organization, an existing Azure commit, if you have sort of committed that you'll spend a certain amount of money on Azure in exchange for a very large discount from Azure or something like that, you can absolutely use that to buy Azure Stack HCI now, right? It's just another service from Azure, like all the other services. There are already hundreds of services, and they all are billed to the same Azure subscription.
right. So yeah, there were a lot of questions sent in.
Yeah, let's do it.
The biggest one and the most focal one was about SPLA or SPLA licensing with Azure Stack HCI, the new version. So, yeah. I mean, like from a hoster perspective, service provider perspective, we're trying to push the density limits of the cluster, of course. So trying to get as much VMs as possible to, you know, get the most out of that data center license against reasonable cost, of course. So the biggest question I got from the forum is there SPLA licensing?
Yeah, sure. So I can do my best to answer that question. I think folks know I work on the engineering team, so licensing is, we're only going to get so far with those questions, but I'll do what I can. So today's products on premises, including most notably Windows Server, are available in a number of different channels. One of them is the Service Provider Licensing Agreement, or SPLA, right? SPLA. Windows Server is going to continue to be available in the SPLA channel, of course. So we're not changing the licensing options that are available for Windows Server. But to be clear, cloud services through Azure are not and have not been available through SPLA in the past, and this is no exception. So with Azure Stack HCI, it'll be available in the channels that you would normally expect Azure cloud services to be available in. So that includes Azure Direct, meaning you just go to azure.com and sign up. It includes things like with free credits, such as Azure for Students or Azure for MSDN subscribers, things like that, Visual Studio, as well as enterprise agreements that a customer has where they got an Azure subscription as part of their EA, or for hosters, you can use the Cloud Solutions Provider, CSP program, which does allow you to take Azure Stack HCI and actually resell it to an end customer of yours, and then help them and provide whatever set of service offerings you want on top, and capture a small revenue share as part of that arrangement. So those are the kind of modern Microsoft licensing constructs, which are available for other Azure services, and those will be the constructs for Azure Stack HCI as well. But again, we're not changing the constructs that exist for Windows Server. So if someone is like deeply married to the way that things work with Windows Server, that's still going to be there.
Okay, but what's the best approach for a service provider then? So they have an on-premise infrastructure, they're hosting VMs for their customers, and there's no SPLA for Azure Stack HCI, so they're just going to run on the new version of Windows Server?
So that's a really good question. Let me separate between two different cases. If you are an integrator or someone who consults for customers or helps other customers to deploy their own HCI infrastructure, then the CSP program is like, it fits like a glove for Azure Stack HCI, right? So you help this customer to acquire their HCI. In the course of doing so, furnish them with an Azure subscription, or you can go into the Microsoft Partner Center at partner.microsoft.com and claim their subscription if you're their partner, their CSP partner. And once you've done that, you can provide a number of different services to them, some of them through Azure, some of them out of band, and you'll actually capture a small share of the revenue of that customer's Azure subscription, including not just HCI, but also if they attach any other services, like that also accrues to you as their CSP. So for that scenario where there's one customer, it's their cluster, but you helped them to set it up, or you help them day to day to manage it, or even potentially if it's like co-located in your facility, for those scenarios, it fits like a glove. It's really easy. For scenarios where you have multiple customers that you're trying to co-locate and co-host on a single Azure Stack HCI, I'll be honest, that is where I don't understand the nuances of the CSP program as well as maybe I should. And so that is where the licensing white paper that our specific licensing expert team is producing, and they'll publish it as soon as they can this month, I think. That is where that will, I think, bring a lot of clarity for those kinds of scenarios. I wish I could give you the exact answer, but I'll be honest, I don't want to like say something that isn't true. So I'm not sure for those co-hosted scenarios. Right.
Oh, I understand. You're not a licensing expert. Neither am I. So it makes two of us. But is it technically possible to do multi-tenancy on Azure Stack HCI cluster?
So there's no native affordances for it built into the HCI stack. So if you're familiar with how virtual machines are kept separate from one another on Hyper-V today, it's essentially the same thing using Azure Stack HCI. So can a runaway virtual machine, if you've given it dynamic memory and you've given it, you've not assigned a storage class policy to it, like could a runaway VM consume a lot of resources? Like sure, right? It's up to you to sort of control that. So that's not different in this new Azure Stack HCI. It's a space that I'm not going to sort of slam the door on us going there, right? I mean, certainly we might, but for right now, Azure Stack HCI, it's important to remember, is part of a broader portfolio of Azure Stack products. And so it is our hyper-converged solution. But for someone who's actually looking to operate their own multi-tenanted cloud with like multiple different subscriptions and chargeback on a per subscription basis and all of that, Azure Stack Hub is an amazing way to do that, right? It has a full Azure consistent concept of subscriptions and offers and plans and tenants and chargeback, and it does keep everybody completely isolated from one another using Azure's standard constructs through ARM for VM sizes. So every single VM that you provision has an upper bound on how much RAM it can consume, has an upper bound on how many IOs it consumes. Like that entire system is designed for this kind of scenario. So if you're looking for a multi-tenanted product, I would strongly encourage folks to actually take a good hard look at Azure Stack Hub. It's an amazing product. And it sort of caters to that in a way that HCI isn't really designed for. HCI is primarily designed for like you're one customer and you're going to take this and run a handful of applications on it, either in your data center or in a branch office or something like that.
I think for me it's crystal clear, but if you have any questions on that, just pop on the Q&A and I will get back to it. So for my take, it's no SPLA licensing, no multi-tenant, so it's probably not the best suit for hosters, but it's great for end customer scenarios or dedicated customer scenarios, which you of course can host for the customer, but not multi-tenant.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I think that's a
cool,
very fair summary, Daryl. Yep.
Going on, number 2 on the list, are features that are coming to Azure Stack HCI, like Hyper-V and S2D, going to be backported to Windows Server vNext? So like the neat features you're showing with quicker repair times and all that kind of stuff.
So it's an interesting question. In general, our team is very focused on building out this new product offering that we believe meets the requirements we hear from customers more often. So we hear feedback all the time around things like we want feature updates to come faster. We want, from like a management perspective, we want this thing to look and feel like an extension of Azure. We want a support organization behind it that is very infrastructure focused. I don't want to call with a question about S2D and get someone who's familiar most with Windows 10. So, we've taken kind of all of that customer feedback and done everything that we can to build this next generation product that better addresses the feedback we're hearing. And that is really where our focus is. So we're not going to be spending a huge amount of effort on bringing each of these features into Windows Server, especially where those features we don't believe necessarily apply as well. So our focus for the infrastructure market and for HCI is really going to be around this new product. Now, with that said, there is some shared componentry, right? Of course. So if you're like someone who knows the internals really well, you'll know that like refs.sys is a shared component that is, of course, present in this new HCI operating system if you go take a look, and it's also part of Windows Server. So there's going to be a lot of places where some of the improvements that we've made, it's actually easier for us to just have them be in both places and not make a distinction. And so in the next versions of Windows Server, to be very, very clear, Hyper-V will be there, Storage Spaces Direct will be there, and it will probably get a little better because some of these things are shared and some of the stuff will just flow in. But in general, our focus for the future of hyper-converged infrastructure is really on this subscription product, and that's where a lot of the innovations that our team is working on are going to go.
Right. So if you're planning to do a Windows Server HCI cluster and you want it stretched, you cannot place your bets on Windows Server vNext, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I would say the way to think about Hyper-V and Storage Spaces Direct is that they are in Windows Server. They have been up until this point. They will remain in Windows Server, but don't expect huge changes. Expect a bunch of small improvements. We're committed to doing right by those customers and continuing to improve those technologies a little. But certainly any big new feature or big new scenario, you should assume that it's going to be in the Azure Stack HCI product. If if it's HCI focused. Sorry, I want to be really clear about that. Windows Server does like 1,000 things, and HCI is just one of those things. And so we now have a separate product line for HCI, right? So of course our focus is going to be on that. For the many other things that Windows Server does, like being a DNS server, being a domain controller, or being a file server, we're not going after that with Azure Stack HCI, right? Of course not. So that innovation is still all going to be focused on Windows Server. It's really just that we've taken this one scenario and doubled down on it with a dedicated product.
Right. But how does that stand for, like, if you're having if an on-premise Windows Server HCI cluster better fits your needs, but you're still lacking like the fast repair jobs? It's hitting you daily on your maintenance, right?
Yeah.
So I think people are a little bit in a squeeze. Like we want the new stuff, but Azure HCI, the current version, is not yet for us. So we need some time to get there, and we need something in between so we can move to it.
My expectation is that there's going to be a lot of customers who are really compelled by the value that we're putting together in this new HCI product. And again, all of the changes that we're making to it in terms of the way that it interacts with Azure, the way that it really is hybrid first, the way that the pricing is not all up front and that it scales down to the edge much better. Like all of those changes that we're making are in response to what we believe are the signals we see from customers in terms of what they want as an HCI product, right? And we have that flexibility because it's its own product line. If a customer is actually more happy with like what is in Windows Server today, like, hey, you know, here's Windows Server 2019. I'm really thrilled with it. It's perfect. It's what I want. It's what I like. That's great. I mean, to be clear, we're one operating systems team. We make both products. I love that, right? I'm responsible for Windows Server too. And so that's fantastic. And those customers should continue to deploy Windows Server. But in terms of like being able to pick and choose exactly the subset of the things that you would like out of that product and put them here, I mean, we can't do that without offering 1,000 different products, right? And so we have this cloud-connected hyper-converged infrastructure as a service that we feel really good about. We also have Windows Server 2019 Data Center, and it will have a successor version as well. And those are products we feel really good about. But there's going to be some amount of like non-overlap, right? Where like, if you want to run it and never, ever connect to a cloud, well, you'll have to use Windows Server. And if you want it to natively show up in your subscription and have some of the features I described today, that'll have to be Azure Stack HCI.
Right. Okay, we're going to do a little bit smaller questions for now.
Sure.
So can we repurpose existing hardware for the use of Azure Stack HCI?
Good question. In general, the answer is yes. So we are not insisting that customers must buy new hardware to use this, but we are only going to offer support for it if it is hardware that matches one of the like validated nodes. But again, that's pretty flexible. So what that really means is you've chosen one of the systems that's in the catalog, and if you have an HBA, it matches, and if you have a network adapter, it matches. So that's not a very high bar. Like if you bought a DL380 from HPE or an R640 or 740 or something like that from Dell, or a recent Think System or Think Agile system from Lenovo, yes, you can repurpose those for Azure Stack HCI because all of those like common popular systems are in the Azure Stack HCI catalog. The only reason we have that constraint at all around like it should match what's in the catalog is just so that we don't get flooded with escalations or something with extremely old systems. Like if you have a Dell 520 from when I was in college, are we going to offer official product support on that? No. But as long as it matches the catalog, yeah, you can totally repurpose existing hardware. Cool.
Are there any plans to expand the usage of this new OS to single non-clustered hosts, like backup hosts with validated hardware?
Okay, that's a fun question. So let me give a quick preamble to that. So right now, Azure Stack HCI needs to get formed into a 2-node cluster or more and then registered with Azure, right? That's a necessary part of setting it up. It very clearly conveys to you that it is like out of policy if it is not in a 2-node cluster or higher and then connected to Azure. So I think this question is, are we going to extend that to like a 1-node type of scenario, like if you had a traditional Hyper-V server or something like that? And we actually haven't disclosed that, but I don't mind saying yes, that is something that we are actively planning for. We would like for customers to be able to standardize on this host operating system. It really is the latest and best from us, right? It's the latest Hyper-V that we've got. It's the latest SDS and SDN that we've got, and it will continue to be updated rapidly over time as a subscription service. So we would like for customers for whom that's compelling to be able to standardize on it. And we realize that that includes a number of clustered and non-clustered host virtualization host scenarios as well. So yes, short answer, yes. Today it's 2+ nodes, but stay tuned because we absolutely intend to at least empower customers who do want to standardize on this as their vert host to be able to do that, and that includes 1 node as well.
Cool, cool. I like how you announce new stuff here.
Maybe I should have asked permission, but yeah.
Next one on GPU partitioning. Will it be available on Azure HCI and when?
Haha, okay. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna pick that question into 2 halves and answer half of it, and then I'm gonna dodge like hell the other half. So short answer, will it be available in Azure Stack HCI? Yes, right? GPUs are increasingly important today when you look at how workloads are structured, especially new applications, things that take advantage of AI and other technologies like image processing, or like there's an increasing dependence on GPUs. So it's very clear that Azure Stack HCI will need to have world-class support for GPUs. And that's something that we have a team for. It's something that we're very committed to. Now, with that said, there was a question there like, okay, what day of what month is this going to come? And I am definitely going to avoid that question just because we have, candidly, we have gotten that wrong before. We've pre-announced when we intended to bring GPUs to market in a particular way, and then we turned out to miss that date. So I'm not going to give a date, but absolutely, we have a dedicated team working on GPUs for Azure Stack HCI.
Nice. I got a question from Bronson. Yeah, he's talking about like you register your Azure Stack HCI cluster in a subscription, right? Mm-hmm. So he sets up separate Fabric AD forests, and they have Azure subscriptions and AAD Connect just for MFA for administrative remote desktop. So can you like register the Azure HCI cluster in one subscription for, you know, management, but let users or customers deploy it from another subscription on the Azure HCI cluster?
So I will give the disclaimer that Bronson, you may well know the nuances of AAD better than I do. So brace yourself to be disappointed by the level of detail I'm able to give in my answer. But when you register in Azure Stack HCI, it 2 things happen. First of all, it becomes a resource and a resource group in your subscription. Second of all, we place an app identity that represents that cluster into your Azure Active Directory. You can think of it like a user. So I believe that does restrict the Azure AD users who can access that HCI to people who are within that Azure Active Directory. But it does not restrict it to the boundary of that subscription. And also, it is very easy to move your Azure Stack HCI from one subscription to another later if you just unregister it and re-register it with a different subscription. I'm not sure if that addresses the specific question Bronson was asking, but also if it doesn't, I know that means I'm unable to. So Bronson, if you want to email me, I will try to find someone who can give you the full answer if what I said isn't sufficient.
Yeah, I think you covered it. So he's specifically talking about 2 different tenants. So not subscription level, but tenant level. So
yeah, it exists within the concept of a single top level tenant in Azure.
Right.
Now, needless to say, Azure is a pretty flexible platform, right? So you can like create a virtual machine on top of the public IP address, and then the world is yours. You can do whatever you want. But in terms of like natively allowing someone from one tenant to access an HCI resource within another, we haven't done anything specific to enable that.
Right. A question that I saw is like with the latest of with Windows Server 2019 and Azure Stack HCI, we did see, because it's not a cloud solution, that local sales offices didn't sell too much Azure Stack HCI. Now with the changing subscription model and billing model, I think that's going to also be a change in the local sales offices. So what is Microsoft Corp doing to help those local sales offices to get up to speed with Azure HCI?
Yeah, good question. So I think the point is well taken, right? Our worldwide commercial sales field at Microsoft is given a set of priorities. which typically span multiple years, but every fiscal year we reiterate what are the things that they should focus their time on learning and being prepared to help customers with. And historically, that has been the set of things under the Azure product umbrella for the last several years. And that did not include things like, well, in fact, there was a whole universe of things that it didn't include. Basically, anything that wasn't Azure was not part of that charter. So the good news is Azure Stack HCI in its new form as a hybrid service from Azure is absolutely covered as part of that, which means it gets a lot of attention from our local sales offices compared to what Windows Server did in the past. To bring them up to speed, there's a few different things that we've been doing. I don't know how much detail you actually want of our internal training practices, but we have internal like readiness airlifts. Recently, there hasn't been much airlifting going on because it's all virtual, but we have been conducting like specific trainings with different pockets of our global sales field to make sure that they're fully aware of Azure Stack HCI and that they are prepared to help customers with it. And based on the volume of customer interest from some pretty big names that we've seen come in the last month, and based on the volume of questions, and I mean specifically like detailed technical questions that show me very clearly people are using the product, like, hey, I hit this interesting case when registering, can you help, sent from Fortune 500 customer. It tells me that the message is getting out there, and our sales field really is starting to embrace Azure Stack HCI, which is, I agree with the person who asked that question. It's very good news, and it's very refreshing compared to where we were before.
Nice. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
I think many with me. So let's touch quickly on stretch clustering. I think we're at time actually. How are you in time? Can you spare some minutes?
So I need to wrap up in a minute or two here, but okay. We can do pick your favorite one last question here that we can do before we sign off.
Good. So stretch clustering. Can I replicate one volume from Paris to London and from London to Paris? And what about active scenarios? Because now it's active passive. So volume lives on one side, not on the other side. But can we do active in both sides?
I can take a stab at that, and then if John Marlin is here as well from our team, he can jump in if I misrepresent this. You can absolutely do active at the cluster level, in the sense that you can have some volumes where the primary is in London and some other volumes where the primary is in Paris, and so the replication is effectively going in both directions at the same time. One volume replicating this way, the other volume replicating that way. So in that sense, you do not have a set of nodes that are completely idle, which is bad for a lot of reasons. So you can have some virtual machines running on each of the two sites at the same time. With that said, on a per volume basis, it is like one directional. And so everybody who is sitting on the Paris volume, for example, would have to be on the same site as where Paris is currently mounted, as where the Paris primary is. But there's nothing that restricts how many volumes you can make. In fact, our team has been rapidly increasing the maximum scale for that. And so you should be able to slice and dice whatever VMs you want to have running in different locations, just create separate volumes for them. And then effectively the whole cluster behaves like it's active. I hope that that's a adequate answer, but John, is there anything that you want to add to that? I don't know if John is able to.
You're good.
Oh. Awesome.
Yep, you're good. Well, great, Cosmos. I really enjoyed this session. There were a lot of questions. It was hard to keep up, actually. I hope the most frequently asked questions were answered. So a lot on licensing. So I look forward to the licensing white paper that's coming out, especially with
Me too.
for Azure HCI.
Hey, Daryl, this was actually a lot of fun. I would love to do this again in a month or something, if that's something the community would be interested in. This was totally a good format for me.
Cool. I will definitely push it. Yeah.
Great. And next time I won't do a presentation, so we'll have even more time for Q&A.
Nice. I like Q&As. So I want to thank everybody for joining from wherever you are. As you heard Cosmos say, we're probably going to do another one. So
yeah,
for that. And thanks for joining. And I hope to see you in the Slack channel.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good day.